Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ko tēnei Karakia timataka e hui e tākata o te committee te herenga waka o te committee Unaunahi Mahi Rahia. Haia te awa, te pūtai tua, te pūtai aho. Haia te awa, te pakiako te rako. O maire nuku, o maire raki, o maire mara whenua. I roka a tāne, i raro a tāne, te raki hia a tāne, paku a tāne, hoi atu o tāriki. Tūturu mau kia whakamaua ka tīna, tīna, haumie, huie, tae ki e. Tēnā rā koutou nā pō waitako o tō tātou matua tīpuna. E tuatahi ka me nui ki te mihi atu ki tō tātou matanui te raki, ko e te timataka me te whakautuku o tau katoa. Anō reira ka mihi au ki te kai homai o ka mea pai katoa. Ka maumahara mātou kia rātou kaitua ko wihi tō wairua. E nō reira e koutou rā, o ia marae, o ia iwi, o ia waka, haere roke ki tāro te whānui a tānei ko tuatarai, haere, haere, e haere atu rā. E ka hoki nā maumahara tia. Mō tō whānau whanaunga o kaitahu kā te mamoi waitaha. E haere atu rā me te upoko runaka o Kāti Huirapa ki Puketaraki. E haere atu rā e David Tohurangi Allison. Nō reira, haere. Ka maumahara tia mō tō wāhene toa o Ngāti Ere Kehu mō tō ōnuku. E haere atu rā e Auntie Polly Parekino Rhodes. E nō reira e Karakatira e wāhine tō e haere atu rā. Haere atu rā ki te pāta whakawairua e takoto. Takoto i rangi māri i rungi tō waka, hoi atu tō waka ko tūtarai. Haere, haere, e haere atu rā. E apiti hono tātai hono tātou ki tō hongo ora ki a tātou. E apiti hono tātou o te hongo ora ki te hongo ora. Let the dead be the dead and the living be the living. And now we enter the world of the living. Nō reira, e mihi atu ki a koutou o te tepu, o te committee Unaunahi Mahi Rahia, Audit and Risk, e mihi atu. Tēnei te mihi mō te tiamana hau o Amorangi, Michael Rondell, mihi atu. Tēnei te mihi, nau mā haere mai, o te mema mō Caroline Risk. Nō reira, e nā kōrua, e mihi atu. Nau mā haere mai, o te rohi pōtai, o te pātawhito o te kohaka kaikai a waro, no marumaru o Maukatere, no ka whakaruru hau o Nai Tuahuriri. Mihi atu mō tō mauka o te poho o Tamate, pōkai whenua, pōkai moana. E tu mai. Nō reira, e te awa o te karo, e te whanaunga o te whānui o Aututahi. Nō reira, nau mai haere mai, ki tēnei whare nei, o te kaunihera taio ki Waitaha. Nō reira, e koutou rā, mihi atu mō tō māngai o te committee o te tepu. E koutou rā, e te ringa raupa, mihi atu i Stephanie, te tiamana. Mihi atu mō tō kai whakahaere o te kaunihera taio ki Waitaha, e Craig, e whanaunga, no reira koutou rā, tēnā koutou, e mihi atu, e kōrua, e te kaiarahi hau, no reira, tēnā koutou, mihi atu kia koutou katoa. A short translation on this, I acknowledge first of all those that being whoever that might be, that you acknowledge as to us around here and who we are. I also acknowledge the passing of two leaders within Ngāi Tahu Kāti Māmoe Waitaha. One was the upoko, or the head of Kāti Huirapa Puketaraki, actually, which is down by Karatani. one of the 18 Papatupu Runanga. And that word Allison, that name Allison, is a very, very well-known name within Ngāi Tahu. You might know Edward Allison, Matapura Allison, but you might not know that it was Tom Allison, actually, the former Māori All Black and All Black, that actually designed the silver fern for the All Blacks. He's buried at Ōtakauripa Cemetery. The other one is our Auntie Polly Rhodes, you know, a major personality at Onuku Marae. The Prime Minister just visited there a couple of weeks ago. And to actually understand that lady and the incredible work that she's done, and particularly for the Taio, Ki uta ki tai, and the Moana and the Whenua. So I wanted to acknowledge those two. I want to acknowledge our new chair and also our new independent director as well, and to acknowledge our incumbent second independent director as well. Michael and Carolyn. And I want to acknowledge too the work of our former chair, who's now the deputy chair, Councillor Edge. But today is your first meeting. We've had the pre-meeting. You've had a kind of a taste, I think, of you know, some of the things that are to come. But if we're actually to be a committee that is the kaitiaki of the pūtea and how we actually operate, and right across this organisation, this is a very, very important, as they all are, committees of Environment Canterbury. Acknowledge also our CE and also all of the staff that actually make this place actually operate. So on that note, I welcome you both to this table and look forward to working with you as all of my colleagues are. So tēnā koutou, e mihi atu, mauria mai e whakaako ki te kaupapa nunui. Nō reira, mihi atu kia koutou katoa.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Councillor Karako, for that those acknowledgements and for that a very warm welcome today. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Ko Raki te Amonga, ko o Takaro toko awa, no Aotearoa ahau, ko Mike Rondell toko ingoa. Good afternoon, I'm Michael Rondell. I'm the new independent chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and I am born and bred Cantabrian, and I just want to take the chance to thank those councillors and staff who have worked with me as we've prepared for this initial meeting, and I look forward to working with everyone on this committee and the staff as well, of course, in the very, very important work that we do here, as you have indicated, a very important committee and part of council. I'd like to ask Carolyn now to also introduce herself.
Thank you, Michael. Kia ora toto, ko Carolyn Riscoho. Thank you for the warmth of that welcome, which has been my experience of engaging with officials to date, and the warmth of the greetings from councillors this morning. It's my great pleasure to return to Te Waiponamu and Ōtautahi, being the place of my childhood and adolescence, having spent 35 years in Pōneke, the benefit of which meant I was well placed to apologise for Christchurch weather throughout January, because I had spent 35 years perfecting the process of apologising for bad weather. I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you and re-engaging with Te Waiponamu and Ōtautahi through the work of this committee, and hope that I am able to support the work that is being done and add some value at a time. It's never not an important time for work of this kind to be undertaken, but one can't help but reflect that times are interesting in the way that the Chinese issue occurs, and so the importance is even greater than might ordinarily be so. So thank you again for the warmth of your welcome, and I look forward to contributing and supporting the work that you all do.
Kia ora. Thank you, Carolyn. And just also, I'd like to acknowledge the advisors that we have in the room. Welcome to the committee. And also, we have some staff presenting to the committee for the first time. And so I'd like to welcome Kirsty McGuinness, our Health and Safety and Wellbeing Manager, Joe Donegan, the General Manager, People and Capability, and Dave Mills, General Manager, Finance and Assurance, who will be presenting to the committee as we go through the afternoon today. So welcome to your first Audit and Risk Committee as well. You joined me as being the newbies in this arrangement. We have no apologies, but we do have Councillor Ward attending online, and Councillor Dyche is also in attendance online as well. So just to note that, thank you. Are there any conflicts of interest of items on today's agenda? Councillor Karakia.
I just do like to register a conflict of interest. A possible conflict of interest is that I am the kaihotu Māori for the Rata Foundation, and the Rata Foundation, part of their Takiwau operating area is actually Wharekodi, Rekohu, Chatham Islands. So I'm actively involved actually in philanthropic services that the Rata Foundation provides over on the Chathams.
Yeah. Thank you. Noted. Any other conflicts? Thank you. There have been no requests for public forums, deputations or petitions. Is there any extraordinary or urgent business? No. Notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion? None. Thank you. We move to item 7 on the agenda, which is minutes, the unconfirmed minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee from 20 November 2024. So the minutes of the previous meeting are on pages 10 to 19 of the agenda. Are there any matters of accuracy relating to the minutes of the meeting of 20 November 2024? No. So the resolution is that the Audit and Risk Committee confirms the minutes from the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 20th of November 2024. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mover, Councillor Edge. Seconder, Graham McGlynn. Councillor Robinson.
I'll abstain because I wasn't at that meeting. I was on other business. So.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. Any discussion, Councillor Edge?
No.
Graham? Any discussion? Any further questions? Motion has been put. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Okay, items for decision. We have the annual audit management report, pages 20 to 53 of the agenda, and there are some recommendations included in there. Could I ask Dave Mills, General Manager, Finance and Assurance, to introduce the report, and also welcome Chantal from Audit New Zealand also.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. I'll take that the report has been read, and I would note just before handing over to Chantal that there is an unmodified audit report that was issued in October last year, and this is a follow-up management letter that I'll ask Chantal to talk to.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to present our report to governors on the audit from last year. In terms of the audit, that's correct. We issued an unmodified audit last year. If we look at the key matters, the summary is very extensive, but I'll just pull out a few items within the report, and then I'm happy to take any questions with regards to it. We worked through the carrying value of assets. So there was a fair value assessment done on the majority of the assets of the organisation. We did not identify any issues with regards to that fair value assessment. There was a forestry evaluation that was done, and we worked through the use of an expert and the inputs that were in line with that, and we did not identify any issues with regards to that. We also looked at the national ticketing solution. We were comfortable with the accounting treatment that ECAN had put through their annual report. What is new this year is probably a bit more information around procurement processes within ECAN. We identified a control weakness through the audit where we identified that purchase orders were not approved on a one-up basis, and we've included a recommendation that's linked to that. We also had our specialist audit service team have a look at the improvement processes that ECAN is working through around procurement, and we've got some insights and recommendations with regard to that within our report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chantal. Do we have any questions of clarification on either the paper or Audit New Zealand's report? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you for this. With regards to managing conflicts of interest policy, I note that it was recommended that, and it was scheduled to have reviews every 3 years within policy, and that between 2018 and current times, we have missed one of those reviews, which adds up to accrues to around 5.5, 6 years. During that period, have you noticed anything other than procurement issues that have been highlighted in your audit that could be something that needs teasing out a bit more? Or
We don't do specific work around procurement when we do our annual audit. This year was an exception because we had our specialist audit services group involved. If we had identified anything through the work that we had done by audit, it would have been presented as a recommendation. There's been no reports of such in the last few years.
You happy with that, Councillor?
yeah, I just guess the concern is that it wasn't implemented, yeah, you've highlighted some recommendations, and I just hope that staff go along and actually implement some of the extra suggestions. So thank you.
Giles, would you like to respond to that from a staff point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to thank Audit New Zealand for the report, very constructive audit process, and the recommendations that were made around that procurement work, as we've indicated in our management response, will be taken into account in the work that Dave is leading to replace the financial management information system and contract management system, and to the work that Audit New Zealand have done will help in that process.
Yes, could follow up, yes.
Just supplementary to that, with regards to conflicts of interest and policies within the staff environment, is it fit for purpose? As a document, does it need to be revisited, I guess?
I think we've been quite sort of we've done the first review that we've done on procurement on the basis that there is an improvement process that's happening within Environment Canterbury. So all of these are done as where we've seen gaps within the policies that we have reviewed. So whether or not it's fit for purpose, I think, is dependent on whether or not it's catching what it needs to catch. And that, would have to be identified through a review of full conflicts registers, et cetera, And what we've said in this report is that we're at the front end of this. The contract register at the moment is probably not fit for purpose for us to be able to start the next steps in terms of being able to analyse whether or not it's catching what it needs to catch.
Thank you. Sorry. Giles would like to reply to that.
Just to add to that, specifically in relation to the conflict of interest policy, as noted in attachment 9.2.2, the current conflict of interest policy is under review. A revised policy has been drafted by General Counsel, and we're currently awaiting feedback. And once that's been finalised, it will be going to the Chief Executive for approval.
Thank you. I think I actually had Councillor Swiggs was the next question.
Thank you for the report. Always interesting to read these things. I was just one general question that I wanted to ask was in terms of the time frame to deliver these reports. The unmodified version was given out the 23rd October, signed off by you on the 13th of February, and it's come to us in a reasonable time then. But is there any way to get these things a little bit faster? So, because this is an eternal bugbear of mine when we come into councillors talking about long-term plan, because some of these things in here, I would have loved to have an understanding of a little bit better going into, sorry, not long-term plan, into annual plan processes and just having those in the back of my mind. So is there any way we can get these things faster?
Yeah, we try and endeavour to get them as close to the conclusion of the audit as possible. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get through. Sometimes there's engagement with management in terms of the responses we get, and that takes a little bit of time to work through. But we will try and work towards getting these a bit earlier for you.
Okay. Yes, these things are my bugbear, because I would like, yeah, I'm not going to go on about it, but with the amount of money that we spend on these things around the country, I just really would like to get some expediency on these before going into next week. We're going to be adopting the annual plan for consultation. So the other question I had was around the total mobility scheme, and I don't know who would want to answer this. This again is another bugbear of mine, but the management comment here is effectively Environment Canterbury's fraud policy makes it clear where appropriate incidences should be reported to police and regular training, and it's the Ministry of Transport that that operates it. It's designed by the Ministry of Transport, operated by us, and it's currently under review nationally. I mean, how widespread is this fraud issue? The scheme is costing a considerable amount of money, more than, it's about 40-50% more this financial or the next financial year than it is this current financial year. And that's having considerable impact on our budgets. Now, I know that's not what you're talking about, but what I'm really worried about is that when we're putting so much more money into it, there's fraud going on. And I understand that those weren't a lot of frauds, but I don't have confidence in the system, and I don't know who can answer that question. And what is it, rather than just saying, yeah, this is the system we've got, this is what's going on, what is it that we can be asking or doing to actually proactively get on top of the potential of the fraud, because it seems like a very easy system to fraud, and two, the spiralling costs. So whoever can answer those questions for me and get that out there so that I can keep thinking about this, I'd be very thankful.
Yeah, I'm not sure Chantel's going to answer that. Giles.
I was going to throw it to Dave. So in terms of the overall scheme, Councillor Swiggs, the overall scheme, we've seen an extensive increase in usage and uptake, which is achieving better social outcomes, obviously, in terms of accessibility and access to transport. That's been primarily driven by the extension by central government of increased concessions and subsidy. That has made it more accessible to the travelling community, which meant that usage has gone up significantly. That's been an issue across the country. That is impacting, obviously, on Environment Canterbury's ratepayers' contribution, but it's also impacting on NZTA's contribution. There is work ongoing nationally by MOT to review the scheme in recognition that there needs to be a review and a revisiting of the settings around the scheme. In terms of the overall cost to Environment Canterbury, if we continue to participate in the scheme, then the costs will be the costs based on the usage numbers and the subsidy that Council has currently agreed. As we have previously talked in other fora, there are potentially two options that Council could take, which staff are not suggesting or recommending, but they are two levers that you can pull. One is to withdraw from the concession, or to reduce the level of subsidy that you provide, or the maximum cap for the subsidy. Both of those would obviously reduce the financial impact, but would obviously reduce the uptake of the scheme. Both of those situations still result in an unlimited budget commitment, because the budget commitment is depending on the level of use of the scheme, and the increase has been driven by that uptake in usage. In relation to the susceptibility of the system to fraud, inevitably, given the nature of the scheme, there are and have been a number of instances over a number of years of small amounts of suspected fraud. In accordance with our fraud policy, we have notified the appropriate authorities, including Audit New Zealand and the Office of the Auditor General. And as a result of the suspected frauds that have been reported to us, and I stress these are suspected frauds and they have been reported through various mechanisms, we recently commissioned, and I believe it's referred to in a later paper on the agenda, a review of the control environment for the Total Mobility Scheme as operated under the direction or administration of NZTA, but are there any opportunities for us to strengthen those controls? We have literally in the last day or so received the final report, and broadly speaking, it says that overall there's a reasonably strong control environment. It has identified one or two areas where there are opportunities to strengthen it, and the public transport team who run the Total Mobility Scheme are looking at how we would implement those either immediately or when we complete the new contracting round, which is just about to commence, or when the scheme is revised by MOT. So those actions are underway.
Thank you. Councillor Swiggs, Heavy.
Can I just do a follow-up on that? When are we expecting to have that MOT update? And is the fraud self-reported, or is there another automated mechanism that can kind of trigger when potential misuse is happening?
So our expectation, I mean, the MOT review has been delayed a number of times. Our expectation is that it should be completed within the first quarter of this year. So ideally by the end of March, we will certainly follow up and provide an update in terms of where MOT are up to. In terms of the reporting of fraud, they have been reported by operators or by individuals. And one of the recommendations in terms of the review that's just been completed is making better use of trend data to identify areas that we could potentially investigate, recognising that trend does not equal fraud. It just maybe raises the risk or the focus where we should investigate further.
Thank you. I have Councillor Southworth and then Councillor Edge.
So I have some questions separate to this, but I just wanted to ask specifically on the total mobility in terms of, you said there were sort of two options here, but in terms of addressing the sort of costs of the total mobility. But one of the things being raised in the past is around on demand, like a Tīmuru My Way type of solution, and whether that could pick up at least parts of the total mobility customer base, as well as being beneficial to other parts of our community. And so are we keeping an eye on that? And I appreciate it's not so much risk, but it's something to keep on, that maybe we can keep that in mind. Sorry, I caught your button.
More broadly, as we explore options around public transport delivery, we continue to think about what are the options that are appropriate for certain communities. And if we were to provide or to be able to support a My Way type solution in other parts of the region other than Timaru, clearly that might impact on the types of service that we might operate, noting that total mobility is predominantly used in Christchurch. And so if we were to change the service, whilst the total mobility might still be available, we might see a reduction in the use of it by customers who would be able or eligible to use it.
I'm happy for you to take your other questions as well.
Okay. Is that all right with you? Well, you're the chair, so I'll take you. Sorry, I'm just remembering who's
I had
boss
you
here.
first before. I had you actually first anyway, so that's fine.
Normally we're
Carry
very
on.
strict about order, and I sort of jumped. But anyway, there's a recommendation of a contract management policy, and some other bits and pieces where there's recommendations. And I noticed in the responses from management, and also looking down subsequently to our work programme, there's not necessarily a really clear line in terms of timelines, time frames. And so I just wondered how important is that? And then it's sort of a related is that so some way later on there's a recommendation from 2022. This is actually in the closed part, so on page 40, I don't know, you won't have our agenda, so it probably doesn't work. But under implemented or closed recommendations, there's a couple which have been closed, but like one of them is around a level of service 2.2, which is to do with the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, reporting on data quarterly and so on. And then in our new long-term plan, the service measure, which we switched to, that doesn't exist. And yet the purpose and importance of the data, that's water management strategy data, is just as valid. And it's something which had certainly fallen off our council table's radar. So when there's a change in a long-term plan and service levels and measures, whatever else, where there's something's been picked up and it's been acknowledged that it's not being done as it was intended, and then it drops off because of a new document. But like, how do you track that through? How do you make sure that those things are continuing? So timeframes, and then that potential loss of something important in a transition.
Thank you for your questions. Effectively, what we've done with our recommendations, if you look, mine's on page 5 of my report, but it would be on page 27 of yours. What we do is we provide a priority rating to our recommendations. We've listed these as necessary, which we believe, they need to be addressed as earliest as possible. We haven't listed them as urgent, which we believe needs to be addressed immediately. But if you look at management's comments, which is why we've accepted without having a definitive time frame, is they've indicated when these will be considered as part of the process. So policies are being reviewed. We know they are subject to being reviewed in the next year. So we will look at it in the next run. In terms of the suggestion around FMIS, we know that council is going through the process of determining that, and that would be an appropriate point to be able to consider a control structure. So that's what we're talking about from an urgency perspective. In terms of when we have a recommendation that potentially has fallen off being a council focus area, what we will need to determine from this committee is whether or not you accept the risk of the recommendation that we've made in the past. So it might be that it is no longer considered a risk for your council, and therefore the comment that comes back to us is this is no longer a focus area for our council, and therefore we accept any risk attached to that. And if everyone is in agreement with that, it will be removed as a recommendation from our report, meaning that effectively the risk transfers to council in terms of making sure that any required action is addressed. We know that there's going to be quite a big difference in terms of the performance measures that we'll be looking at this year, having been through your long-term plan round last year. So we're actually working on that at the moment to determine what the material measures for the current year are going to be.
You come.
Well, yeah, just to say, sometimes there isn't a clear link between the recommendation and then the commentary doesn't actually link back. So like that level of service 2.2, all of the commentary is around public transport, but actually there's 3 levels of service which fall into 3 different parts of our council. So the commentary doesn't actually close off and tie up all of the points.
Thank you. I take your point.
I think management would like to respond to that, Giles.
I just wanted to respond more broadly to Councillor Southworth's, because they're absolutely valid questions and useful to provide that context. In terms of the recommendation around having a contract management policy, we obviously have a procurement policy. We know that there are some areas that, as with all policies, they are living documents. And so as we develop our thinking around that and the new contract management system, we will consider what changes need to be made either to the procurement policy or to potentially introduce a separate policy, rather than just responding and saying we're going to introduce one. So that will be picked up by the work that Dave is leading. The second point is that I think that we, and I believe the audit would support this, I don't want to put words in Chantel's mouth, the introduction of the impact framework and the new performance measures that the council has adopted for the current year are a significant improvement on what we have had in the past. The challenge always when you change performance measures is the balance between continuity and trend and relevance and appropriateness. Some of the items that you've talked about are absolutely critical things that the organisation needs to continue to do, and that council needs to have some assurance that those things like the CWMS or other documents or other plans are being refreshed and published in the appropriate way, and that the challenge for us, or the opportunity for us, is to demonstrate through our reporting that those things are happening whilst they're not actually a demonstration of the performance of our service to the community.
Thank you, Giles. Just, I know I was going to come to you, Councillor Edge, but both Councillor Swiggs and Graham indicated you might have had questions. Were they directly in relation to the same point that Councillor Southworth made, or was there something else? Yours was about, you want to go back to the one before? The one before Councillor Southworth, her original comments? I just want to get your questions before, both on total mobility. Councillor Edge, are you happy if we go to those questions before I come to you? Okay, thank you. Councillor Swiggs was actually first, so we'll go Councillor Swiggs and then you, Graham.
I suspect that Graham might be asking the same question that I might be asking, so there's a risk here that I become a one-sided person bashing on this, so I'll let Graham ask it potentially.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Total mobility, for those with a long enough memory, that we had quite a investigation into this probably 4 years ago. I'm not sure whether it was before you were in the seat, Giles, or prior.
I think it was reported to my first audit committee.
But just seeing whether the symptoms that we're seeing in this situation in any way replicate the issues that we saw back in that previous quite in-depth investigation, and if they are the same, I'm just wondering where the learning curve is and any reasons, and whether there is a need for a bit of a look back also at that previous report.
So the previous report was made available to PwC, who undertook the review that's recently been completed. That review obviously we've just received it as management. We will be reporting that to the next audit committee.
Was that the question?
Related to it, but the only other thing that I wanted to ask is being self-reported, there's no incentive for anybody to report that. The people that are going to be reporting the fraud are the ones that are making the money out of it. So it's where is the control for this? This really concerns me, and that's what I'm trying to get at.
So the nature of any system always has the ability to, depends on controls operating effectively. Many frauds operate or are at least successful for a period of time through collusion, and it's incredibly difficult to put a control in place to avoid collusion. That's why we need regular reconfirmation of eligibility. That's why we need trend analysis, unusual patterns. So, for example, one of the recommendations is that we should look at trends where there is a similar driver-passenger combination. We already do that. We probably could do it in a more structured way, but we also know that many people who access total mobility, given the nature of their need to access the service, actually request the same driver every time. So it can be an indicator of fraud, but it usually isn't. So the nature of the system and the levels of fraud the suspected fraud, I must use that word, sorry, that we have experienced over the last 12 months and previously are actually extremely small given the amount of money going through the system.
Okay, thank you. I think in relation to that, once we get that report, which presumably come to the next meeting, we'll have a bit more of an opportunity to go through those findings and recommendations and see where we're at that point. So I'm probably happy to draw the total mobility to a close. Is that okay?
What we can make sure is that for the next meeting, we have PwC, who undertook the report, in attendance.
Yeah.
and probably also the relevant officer from the public transport team who operates the system, so that the committee can ask appropriate questions in response to that report.
Yeah, that would be useful. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Edge.
Just two things, just following up on that discussion about suspected fraud for the total mobility. I really just want to refer the member to the actual fraud policy, which is really clear in the way that it describes the actions that are required by council and staff if there's a suspected fraud and the processes involved. So that would be useful for you to have a look at. Might answer some of your questions.
I have read it, but the drivers are external contractors.
Chantal, thank you very much for this report. I just a quick question from me, but I think it's probably been answered. You're on page 21. You refer to 3 new recommendations, some recommendations that have been resolved and closed, and then 3 open recommendations from the 22-23. I think you were referring to before that you were about to get underway with the 24-25 process. And I know that in terms of the question before about terms of timeframes, your report to us in October was actually ahead of time or on time. And of course we had Christmas holidays and stuff. And I know that during that time that you were working to make sure that this report and your investigation of some issues was thoroughly. And so that's why you've come to the very first Audit and Risk Committee of the year. So your timeframes obviously are very tight. My question is basically, are those issues that are reported here, that they will be taken account of in your 24-25 investigation?
Yes, in terms of any open recommendations, we will make sure that we actually follow those up each year. So some of the open recommendations are open because, for instance, there hasn't been an evaluation for the last year, so we weren't able to determine whether or not the GIS reconciliation has been performed. But we will work through each of these as we go.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions before I put the motion? There will be further chance for discussion after that, but are there any further questions or clarifications from Chantal while we have you here? Or Dave? No? Okay, well, I'll put the motion. As I say, there will then be an opportunity for discussion should there be any. The recommendations are on page 20 of the agenda. So the motion is that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the Audit New Zealand report to Council on the annual report for the year ended 30 June 2024 and endorses the recommendations and management responses, which will be monitored as part of the committee's outstanding actions and followed up by Audit New Zealand as part of their 2024-25 audit. Councillor Edge.
I'd like to move.
Happy to move. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. Any further discussion?
Yep. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I'd like to say thank you very much for your report. And obviously, David's just on board, but the whole process went really smoothly, I understand, throughout the year in terms of the efficiency of your team, the questions that you asked, and the responses that came back to you in pretty good time. For you to carry on, and that process went through that whole interim from May right through. So that was very pleasing. And of course for us, it's the second year in a running that we've had unmodified reports. So our team are doing pretty well in terms of making sure that we are compliant with those processes that we need to follow in terms of accounting and accountability. So that's very good. I just want to say, in terms of the matters that are raised in the audit report, you've made some really good recommendations. Staff have given some management comment, and you're generally satisfied, I suspect, that the staff have taken on board the recommendations, and it looks like to me that they're in agreement with the recommendations that you make, and you're following through on those. And particularly on page 35, the issue related to procurement and contract management, and your acknowledgement that Environment Canterbury is actively working to strengthen procurement and contract management practices, and there's several initiatives already underway for that, and we know that there has been a problem in that, and there's other papers that we'll look at, but it is, we're getting on top of it. One of the recommendations too, that that particular item will be taken into consideration in terms of the planned replacement of the FMIS process, which is a global World Bank kind of checking progress, my understanding, and that it's something that's a global system of making sure those financial things are kept under control, and the contract management systems as well in terms of policies, procedures and guidance and things like that. So look, I'm really pleased, and I think in the terms of that one, page 47, yeah, you elaborate a little bit more on some of the conclusions in the reporting as that. But thank you very much for your report, and we look forward to management continuing to work with you to deliver on those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. Councillor Sunkel, did you have any other questions? No. Okay. Any other questions at all then on this report? We have a forward and a seconder. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Dave, for now. Okay, we'll move to item 9 on the agenda, the Audit and Risk Committee resolution status report, which I note the current resolution is that they are, or sorry, status is they are all green and complete. Giles, do you have any further comment or question to that paper?
No, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Graham?
Just noted on the third item down, the fraud risk assessment, Kainga and Odeon facades, that's in this month, and there's a science peer review. Have I missed something on the way through? But I don't think I've seen that in the papers.
So there is an update included in the assurance paper. I think it's been delayed further, but it's still very much on the radar and will be reported hopefully at the next committee. I'm looking at my colleague. Yes, as I'm getting a nod. So it's just been slightly delayed further, but Tim, the Director of Sciences, will be providing that for the next meeting.
Can I ask then that that will be noted through into the schedule for next month, so because it is actually not quite complete.
Agreed. Thank you. Any other questions on that update? There being none, can I, the motion is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the status of previous resolutions provided in the Audit and Risk Committee Resolution Status Report at February 2025, noting the comment Graham's just made. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Graham. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. 9.2, the Committee Work Plan and Policy Update. Again, this is on pages 58 to 63. Recommendations are on page 58. Giles, would you like to talk to that, please?
Yeah, this is a standing item on the committee's agenda. Just a couple of things I'd like to highlight is, obviously we still have to confirm the date for the 4th meeting of the year, because that will be after council elections, and we will also be organising a special meeting to consider the annual report, and obviously any audit report that flows from that, in terms of the timing of that. And then in terms of the policy updates, we have provided an indication of when policies currently under review can be expected for approval for the council policies and what we have indicated in relation to the corporate policies. Most of those requiring review relate to the GM of People's area of responsibility. We've been waiting for Jo to get her feet firmly under the table before we look to do that work, because we are aiming to consolidate and lift up our people policies so that we have a much clearer and holistic approach to that area of the business, with procedures and processes sitting below, and we'll be able to provide further updates of the timing of that at the next meeting.
Thank you. Questions on that? I think I had Graham first, and then I'll come to Councillor Swiggs.
Realise the quirks of elections and confirming in councils and bits and pieces, but I can speak as an independent, although I won't be there. It's really useful if we put in a placeholder date in there. This is only a subcommittee and it really should be able to carry on, but to get the attendance, I know as an auditor that our chair will be frantically busy at that time, and it'll be really useful, I think, for the flow if we can identify a placeholder date which is pretty much locked in concrete, even though it's not our decision of this triennium.
Yeah, welcome to work with you
I
on
can
that.
confirm that I am working closely with governance to ensure that that is the case, Graham.
Okay. We'll have a date for the next meeting, Graham. Thank you. Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, just had a question on there's a lot of orange on this 9.2.2, and I was thinking about it last time, but we've got arbitrary dates on the expiry of a lot of these policies. The question that I'm going to ask is are those dates realistic in terms of the work, the capability within the organisation? Because something's not quite, to me, working in terms of being able to refresh these at a certain date. Are they broken and do they need to be replaced is the question that I'm going to ask. And then do we have the capability to actually do these things by the dates that we're setting internally for them to be done?
So over the last couple of years, Councillor, we have been working to ensure that there is overarching visibility of our policy, and that's why we have this schedule here. That also requires us implementing a review cycle. As you'll see with the council policies, they are very much aligned with the LTP. There are a few exceptions to that, and we have confirmed prior to this meeting that those dates are realistic and we are aiming to achieve those for those council policies. In terms of the corporate policy, as indicated, most of those amber are around areas that sit within the people space, and we do need to do that work to consolidate those, and that will ensure that that becomes a more green spreadsheet. The other point to note is that the 3-year review cycle is there deliberately, but we also include that if policies miss that review cycle for any reason, the policy still remains valid. They do not expire and become non-applicable. These are living documents, and we are increasingly getting into the habit of ensuring that that key part of our control framework is in place and up to date.
Thank you. Councillor Swiggs, further questions? No? Any other further questions then? Yes, Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, thank you. And just specifically under enforcement policy, we've got a date that we're reviewing before the end of the financial year, 24-25, that's this year, soon. So how are we tracking? Is that going to be achieved?
So I confirm with the Director of Operations that we're on track to bring that just before the meeting.
Thank you. Any further discussions or questions before I put the motion? No? Okay. The recommendations, and I'll put the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee endorses the Forward Committee work plan and endorses the status of council and corporate policies and the schedule of policies to be approved in the next 6 months. Do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Edge. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any further questions? Discussions? No? All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. 9.3, Health and Safety and Wellbeing Update. It's pages 64 to 80 of the agenda. Recommendations are on page 64. and I welcome Joe for the first time, Joe and Kirsty, up to talk to their report. Please, again, you can take the report as read, but please highlight any key areas, and then we'll take some questions.
Tēnā koutou and tēnā kōrua to our new members, and particularly tēnā koe, Councillor Korako, for your warm opening, particularly your reference to mana whenua and the recent passings. Kia ora. Yes, take the report as read. I've got my colleague Kirsty here, who's also, as you mentioned, in her first meeting, and we're going to have a discussion, I believe, around the driver policy, if one needs to be had. So we've got Dave there as the owner of their policy as well. So take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Southworth.
Just one. Under the occupational health monitoring, so under point 20, it says that it became apparent that the monitoring wasn't any longer in place. And I'm just wondering, do you know how that has happened? Obviously, it's being picked up now, but is there a risk there are other things that we've missed and that aren't being done?
Kia ora. The health monitoring had been in place for quite some time, and there had been the procedures were being refreshed and worked on by a colleague, and that colleague subsequently left the business. The health and safety team picked that back up again and went through the health monitoring process with staff, with subsequent referrals off to their GPs if required. So for audiology, there were lots of people with wax in their ears. And so those referrals have gone on, and that program will now stand and will not be discontinued ever.
Thank you. Yes, follow-up question?
So just in the context of that being potentially one of some other things as well, like are we, just as that work programme has been capturing our policy stuff, is there something now that's, identifies all these various things that should be happening, so that that there isn't a risk that if one particular person who happens to be tracking something leaves, that there's no continuity? Like, it's that bit that's it sort of flags. Is there now a new mechanism to make sure that other things similar don't fall off the to-do list?
As you can imagine, I'm 2 weeks in the job, but my intention is that we will have a program of activity that has a work plan, an annual work plan with a strategic plan for 3 years. That is something that I will be undertaking, looking at what is previously there, but certainly having that in place so that this does not happen again.
Thank you. Councillor Karaka.
E mihi atu whakawhetai mo tō tautoko o te mihi, temataka e hui hui e tākata. Can I just turn to review of the motor vehicle and driver policy, please? And I take note in 15 that you're wanting any other feedback. So in this one, we're talking about branded vehicles. And what I know we had a briefing on this yesterday. What I believe is that I want to know, because I think that there's a risk here of reputational damage for this organisation, and it's more around unbranded vehicles. Because what you're doing here is highlighting branded vehicles, where I didn't quite understand your whakaro around unbranded vehicles, because unbranded vehicles, and then we've got this situation of, as part of remuneration packages, you've got, there is expenses to the person who is actually using the unbranded vehicle. And also to understand, so the chair of Environment Canterbury has an unbranded vehicle, and do the directors as well. And so how does how does this policy that you're actually doing, how does that actually cover the unbranded vehicles? Because that is where the risk, as we've seen before this, so if suddenly you're kind of saying, hey, we're not actually going to acknowledge the unbranded vehicles, yet there was a huge problem around that.
Thank you. Who'd like to respond to that? Giles?
Thank you, Councillor. So the intent behind the revision to the policy is to recognise that unbranded vehicles that are provided through a salary sacrifice scheme for directors, should they choose to exercise that right, and also it's not quite a salary sacrifice, but is also related to the chair contributing should they choose to take the vehicle, is predominantly for personal use. So therefore, treating it as a personal vehicle rather than as predominantly a work vehicle, which is what branded vehicles are. Hence the differentiation and the application of this policy to vehicles when they are on work business, in effect.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Not quite. Can I have a supplementary?
Absolutely.
So the idea of the use of an unbranded vehicle, does it still have a GPS? And what about the data that's collected on that GPS? Is it actually part of this process of a branded vehicle? And we talked about the security levels of that information yesterday.
At the moment, under the current policy, all Environment Canterbury vehicles have a GPS in. If the Chief Executive chooses to approve this policy as it currently stands, then the GPS units would be removed from the unbranded vehicles, and therefore there would be no GPS data being collected from vehicles that are predominantly provided for personal use.
Happy to follow up, yes.
That's my point about the reputational risk here, because it's kind of shutting the door after the horses bolted of what happened to the previous chair. So all I'm saying is that it's an inherent risk that this new policy, particularly around our reputation as Environment Canterbury. That's what I'm saying.
So we've reviewed the policy based on obviously the experience of last year, and also so we recognise and believe that this way forward is the correct way to go. It's consistent with how a number of other organisations and councils use unbranded vehicles, and we believe that the draft policy is a better way to proceed in terms of recognising that unbranded vehicles are paid for by the individual who is using them, and also is predominantly for personal use.
Can I have a final comment?
Allowed one more, yes.
Yeah, okay. So if you look at the optics on this, so what you're saying is that the chairman's car and all directors actually haven't got a GPS in their vehicle. So that means that if they're speeding or whatever, so that's not actually recorded anywhere.
It is recorded currently to those directors that do so under the current arrangements, if a director does not choose to take a salary sacrifice car, they do not have a GPS in their personal vehicle. But they would choose to drive a branded vehicle to go to other places of work. So I myself do not have a salary sacrifice vehicle. When I go to Timaru, I take a work vehicle which has GPS in it.
No more question.
I think just for clarification, though, I think the question was, quite rightly, if this policy was approved, it would mean that those unbranded vehicles would no longer have GPS recording of that data. That was the question I think you were trying to point, yes, for clarification.
Which we believe is the right way to move forward.
Okay. Thank you. I know Councillor Ward online has a question, but actually Graham McLean was first, and then I'll come to Councillor Ward. So, Graham.
Yeah, looking at this, I was getting visions of Animal Farm coming up and the perceptions from our staff and people that there's one set of rules for one group of people and another set for another. All pigs are equal, but some are more equal than others, I think was the quote from Animal Farm. So I think if we've got a policy, personal view is that it should be applied right across. If you've got a salary sacrifice vehicle, you've chosen to take that. We search the rego. If you're up for speeding or anything else happens, the risk sits with Environment Canterbury. I understand the perception of it being effectively a salary sacrifice and you're paying for it, the use of it out of your salary as a mechanism, but I think we've got to think about the optics, which I think was the point you were making, Nook, on that. And, you know, I think if it's a policy, if it's a private vehicle, it's a private vehicle. If it's a council one, it's a council one. And keeping it really quite simple would be my thought. I'm just thinking, what would the staff say if they knew that there's a different set of rules?
Okay, thank you, Graham. Councillor Ward.
Grant's just actually hit the nail on the head, what the statement I was going to make. So thank you for that.
That was Councillor Ward just talking, wasn't it? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Grant. Sorry, Graham. Yeah.
Graham.
Okay.
Sorry, Graham, not Grant.
Yes, it was Graham.
Sorry.
It does sound similar. I'll get it right. Carolyn.
Thank you. I think this is quite a useful discussion in terms of what is intended to govern by this policy, because the lawyer in me says that actually, as it's currently drafted, it would cover use of the personal unbranded vehicle for council business, in the sense that the policy itself refers to personal vehicles, that it refers to hire vehicles as well, which are unbranded. So if it's intended to only apply to branded vehicles, then it needs to be much more explicit about that, because at the moment it covers vehicles that are not branded. So I think it would be just useful to be clear, is this a health and safety exercise to ensure that when vehicles are being used for the purposes of undertaking ECAN business, they are being used safely in ways that can ensure everybody is addressing legal responsibilities, etc. Is it an asset management, or is it a reputation risk, or a little bit of all of those things? I think it would be possible to reconcile the two in terms of being clear about a personal vehicle that is used. It would be governed by the policy when it's being used for the purposes of engaging in ECAN business, but other use would be outside the scope of the policy if that was what was intended. But it would be useful to be quite clear about what is this policy intended to achieve. And when I had read it, I thought that it was looking at applying to any person who was using an ECAN authorised vehicle for the purposes of undertaking ECAN business, and defining how you would use that and what obligations and responsibilities you assume as a driver of that vehicle for those purposes. If it's intended to manage a different kind of risk, then I think it would be useful to be quite explicit about the circumstances in which you see this being applied and the nature of the risk that you're looking to manage.
So the only point of clarification, I think that's very helpful feedback, is that the hired vehicles that it refers to is we do have a number of branded vehicles that are on, so our electric vehicles are not owned by Environment Canterbury, they are hired, leased. So that is the, but take the...
Yeah, so I think, again, I've got a number of drafting feedback that we don't need to deal with around the table, but I think there are a number of areas in which the drafting could be tightened or in some cases expanded, because I suspect there's some unintended consequence of the language that's there at the moment, but they are just drafting issues. And once we've got clarity as to the intended scope and application, happy to have an offline conversation about the language that's used to progress.
Thank you. Yes, that's part of the feedback. Councillor Sunkel.
I guess I'm a bit challenged about the branded versus not branded. When I think back to early conversations around articulating fraud policy and a whole bunch of things, we always talk about we set the policy and we set the standard at the top, and we talk to the bottom, and somewhere in the middle we meet. But both the governance and the management and the staff absolutely understand. So it does challenge me that we have unbranded vehicles that won't be part of a policy, and yet anyone else driving a branded vehicle is part of the policy. So it's just a challenge of what are we articulating, what is the vision we're driving into the organisation if we do have two different standards. That's just the question on my mind.
Yes, thank you. I think that's pretty clear to the management team that that's causing some angst amongst the committee members just around that, particularly that issue of the unbranded and the consistency of policy across all vehicles, if that was the intent of the policy, versus having effectively a carved out portion for the unbranded vehicles. Councillor Robinson?
It's along the same lines, and I actually am thankful for Carolyn's internal lawyer speaking because it was very clear. I was under the assumption that what you were trying to say is the equivalent of like a police car fleet where you have marked police cars that say police and unmarked police cars still owned by the police. And is this what we're referring to? Because we do have some Environment Canterbury vehicles that don't have Environment Canterbury on them. Is that not correct? I thought we...
All our vehicles are branded, apart from the very few that, as I say, are predominantly for personal use. I think it's just really good feedback that I know that Dave and Joe will take on board, and obviously will feed through to the Chief Executive. I would also like to highlight that every single person in this room is required to drive within the laws of the land and is not expected to speed at any point, and is responsible for any. So ultimately, this is in effect reinforcing that we expect people to not speed, but I think society expects us not to speed.
Thank you. It's not just about speed, but you're right. Yeah, it does require
Not just about speed.
Okay, there's been some handy feedback there. Anyone else got any other commentary then on the draft, well, the full paper actually, but we've honed in specifically as I thought we might on the driver policy. Anything else that anyone wants to cover off? Councillor Pawn.
Yeah, look, a really good discussion, and thanks, councillors and committee members, for raising what they have. I thought when I read it around the branded versus unbranded, I thought that seemed a reasonable thing, but the feedback that's been given, I think, is worth noting and reflecting when it comes back, because, I have some sympathy for what's been said around, look, if it's through the books at ECAN, that does have some, because it will be used for ECAN business at some point. So I think from a health and safety perspective, that is important, that's known about. And that's just maybe part of that process when you choose to do that. If either a chair or a director chooses to have that process done, then they do become under this policy. I think that's a fair enough thing. So anyway, I think really good, useful feedback that's been given.
Great, thank you. And I just want to reiterate again that the motion covers the whole paper for health and safety and wellbeing. So is there anything else other than the driver policy that anyone wants to pick up on or question? Yes, sorry, I got two. Councillor Sung, I think got in first before you, Graham, so I'll take you first.
Just a question on the bikes on buses. I don't need a long story. I'm just wondering, do we have a view of when we might find some resolution to that question?
Thank you, Councillor. So we are an active part of the working group and the steering group. There is an approach that has been agreed in relation to two bike racks, and there's a line. There's a test that can be applied to ensure that you are able to illuminate the road in front of you effectively. We have tested the majority of our fleet and have identified, or the operators have, those buses that sit above the line, i.e. they need some corrective action, which mostly is putting an additional lamp on the front. Those lamps have been ordered and then they will need to be fitted. We are still awaiting a resolution or an acceptance of the methodology for 3 bike racks, because we have a number of those. And if we are not able to get agreement to what we believe is an acceptable methodology, then we may choose to replace all the 3 bike rack buses with 2 bike rack buses. But again, we're working through that process. The challenge is getting NZTA to rule on a couple of items that have been put to them by the PTAs, led by Environment Canterbury, and also then the work that is needed to make those corrections. and then discussing whether we can reintroduce buses with bike racks on a route by route basis, or whether we need to wait till the whole network has been done, because clearly what we don't want to do is to take your chances, and if the bus happens to have a bike rack, you can use it, and if it doesn't have a bike rack, you can't. So we're working through those things, but the main challenge for us is A, doing the assessments, and then B, getting the additional equipment and putting it on.
Happy? No, but I think that's the answer. Thank you. Graham?
Thank you, John. That was one of my two questions that I had. The other one was page 68, just the violence and aggression, and I'm seeing that across all the councils that I'm on, with being aware of that and just highlighting that we're working into an election period where there's going to be more exposure out there, there's going to be meetings, there's going to be perhaps a little more heat potentially out there, and that we just need to keep a really close eye on the safety of our people and the elected members, and I guess also by inference of the election process, perhaps the potential elected members that might be out there in the hustings coming forward. So it is an area of risk, thinking about egress options and all this stuff that I know that we've got in our security policy, but it is concerning that the critical risk reporting, the highest item was there, the violence and aggression. And that is consistent across all the councils I'm involved in.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. Yes, very much of concern. Councillor Swiggs?
Yeah, just wanted to ask, because I was just looking at from the report beforehand around the policies that are still yet to be written and the health and safety element of that, but wellbeing is important to me as much as anything here, and there's not a huge amount in this paper about wellbeing. And drug and alcohol obviously is a hot topic around the place at the moment, and obviously that policy hasn't been updated. And I'm concerned, especially with those stresses that are coming on us as an organisation externally, cost of living, all those things. People will be looking at ways to sort of manage themselves and whatnot. And are we seeing incidences of drugs and alcohol within staff or within, that are leading to other issues? Because, I don't see a lot of that particularly in this report. So are we looking at to do that at some stage? But I would like to understand if you're seeing any drug and alcohol issues, are we reporting those, if they've been reported into the organisation and those things? Because that, for me, is kind of the top level, and then you go down after that.
Wellbeing is a really important aspect for me. It's part of my role. It's part of my title. And I am blessed that we have a CE who feels exactly the same way, and it's really refreshing to hear that it's important for you and likely for many of you who sit around this table. I come with a huge passion for ensuring that wellbeing is across the organisation. I have spoken to the CE about developing a strategy which will have an underpinning plan. We will work with the People and Capability team and look to see what other policies that might underpin that, and to ensure that across the business going forward, we will have a comprehensive plan. And I would also like to be reporting some of that wellbeing activity back into this group with any, obviously, concerns. At this stage, I can't say that there's been any reported from my conversations with the Health and Safety Wellbeing team that there's been anything drug and alcohol related, because I have asked that question in my short time here.
Thank you. And yes, I agree the committee would appreciate the inclusion of some wellbeing metrics and other reporting if we can going forward. Thank you. Councillor Southwell.
Thank you. Just following on the bike racks, you didn't mention the potential for the exemption for daytime. Has there been any update on that? And then I've got another question.
So we met with NZTA on Friday, where we requested an update. So for councillors that are unaware, we asked or requested an exemption for daytime use of bike racks, as we do not believe there are any issues associated with that, because the issue is about illumination on the road in front of you. It's not about seeing the bus. We were expecting, or we were told that we would have a decision on that last week from the regulatory part of NZTA. We did not receive that, so I have emailed them. We talked to them about it on Friday, and I have emailed them this morning and requested an update on when we will expect a decision.
That's fabulous to hear. Let's hope they respond promptly with this piece of paper. Then in terms of the question, so we're at the very bottom under public transport incident management, we're recognising that incidents are correctly recorded in our system from the different operators that we have. And I'm just wondering, is there a mechanism, do we look for trends and patterns of difference between the two operators in terms of the types of incidents and so on that might help to give us some insights maybe into differences between how they manage that? There might be some good lessons to learn, or one needs particularly to pick up on some aspects and the other on something different. Do we do that?
Yes, we do look across the two operators, and obviously we engage with them, but we also share between them the trends and identification. And as we've highlighted in the report, the important thing is we start to bring that incident reporting into the reporting we provide, because obviously other contractors are included in our reporting because they are working on our business on our land, while in effect bus operators are operating for us. And so therefore it's really important that we have visibility, recognising that there are different responsibilities of different organisations in the health and safety space.
Thank you. Councillor Pauling.
Kia ora. Hey, first of all, Giles, thanks so much for the update on the bike on buses stuff, and John and Vicky for your questions. And look, I know you've put a lot of work into it, and great to hear the latest on that. I suppose, like other councillors who may have read with interest the Nelson success that council's had with their bike racks on buses, I just wondered, and the question is, do we have the same type of racks that they have been exempted for, or have we got? I know we've got various different ones, but have we got some of ours the same as the ones that they've had exempted?
I can't answer the question specifically, but we may well have. The advantage that Nelson has is that they have very few buses. They, I believe, only have one type of bus and one type of rack. And so therefore they were able to very quickly apply for that exemption. We potentially could apply for exemptions for individual buses, but then we would have the problem about, well, which routes do we put them on? So they have had Nelson has had the opportunity to resolve the situation for them very quickly. And quite rightly, we recognise that it wouldn't be appropriate for us as a country to wait for all PTAs to be in a position, because that disadvantages the communities such as Nelson.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions on this paper? There's been lots of discussion on this paper. Any further questions at all on the health, safety and wellbeing update before I put the motion? Councillor Robinson.
This is probably a question for Kirsty. It's Kirsty, isn't it? Yeah. So just with regards to sort of incident reporting and I guess the clarity between organisational staff, contractors and councillors, how do you determine the reporting on those? Is it like clumped together in one grouping, or would it be separate for incidents?
For the purposes of this report, it will be as you read it, in terms of the 11 critical risks. We wouldn't necessarily drill down further in terms of what that looks like. It'll be violence and aggression, and that would be right across the board. For the purposes of ELT and our senior leadership team, we would be providing more context if they asked for it. So from a working perspective, that's where the questions. But for the data that you have here in front of you, it will be all cases of violence and aggression, and anything else under that critical risk and non-critical risk data.
So if If I wanted like a little bit more teasing out of the, the violence and aggression or driving on road, how do I get the absolute data or detail on that? Clearly not, personal information, but I guess detail on what it was or what happened because that would be part of our sort of future focus is trying to limit incidents. So do we have a wee bit more detail on some of those? I'm sorry.
My plan is to, going forward, is to look at the data that we provide to you, report on anything that is of a critical nature within the critical risks that we have, because it's important that you know of anything that is emergent or likely to hurt reputationally. So I am happy to look at the data that we provide and come back to the next meeting with perhaps a little bit more detail if it's required.
Thank you. And I think that would be useful just to get that extra layer of understanding, particularly in those critical risk areas where there is obvious trends like that, one that's significant, what might be behind that a little bit, and some feedback, I think, to the committee just around what has caused that, if it's known, and what particularly the actions are being taken to try and reduce or mitigate it going forward.
And that is something that I have reported in my previous job, where we look at the critical risks within the critical risks and any corrective actions that have been taken, and I'd be happy to supply that with you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, last chance again on this particular paper before I put the motion. There will be discussion time if need be. Okay, once the motion is put, but I'll then put the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the report on health, safety and wellbeing. There is a slight change to 2.4, I think, from the one that's currently in the papers, which you can see now on screen in red. But I would take this motion altogether. So we consider the draft motor vehicle and driver policy as has been discussed at length, and including the new 2.4, which is any other matters relating to the application or content of the policy. And I think it's fair to say management have received a reasonable amount of other matters relating to the application and content of the policy. So there would be an expectation that as we move to point 3, the acknowledgement that the draft motor vehicle policy will be finalised in accordance with internal processes. But as a result of the discussion today, I think there's an expectation that that policy will have some review prior to finalisation. Does that make sense?
I will discuss with the Chief Executive how we handle and respond to the feedback. But yeah, I'm sure we will give visibility of the policy.
Okay. Thank you. Do I have a mover for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edge. Would you like to discuss further? Thank you.
Just quickly, really just acknowledging the next steps. Critical risk training is continuing. People, leaders and staff, and the executive leadership team is going to be provided with regular updates. And your comment about if they required more detailed information, that would be provided as well. So that's all my only comment. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any further comments, Councillor Swiggs?
All I really want to say here is thank you for your words on the wellbeing side of this, and I would look forward to seeing a bit more about what that looks like. Soft influence is just as important to me as some of the harder stuff here, because a lot of that can be the leading indicators to other issues down the track. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that, and thank you for your continued focus on that. Well, your focus moving forward on that would be great.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion. We have it's been forwarded and seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against?
Aye.
Thank you. Carried. Thank you, team. Okay, moving along, just conscious of time, 9.4 Treasury report. I'd welcome Dave to stay, actually, Dave Mills to stay, and David Walker to come to the table. Dave's swapping from one end to the other. And we'll take the Treasury report, as always, taken as read. But we do have a presentation, David, I think, that you'd like to take us through. So welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
I just wanted, Chair, before we do that, because I know that we look forward to David Walker's presentations from what I've heard from the past, just to give, I guess, councillors assurance of what I've looked at in this report and the relationship we have with David and his team around the compliance with the Treasury policy in particular, which gives us parameters with which to work with around our fixed and floating rate debt exposures and the parameters, but also the flexibility and the value that we put on the relationship and the advice that David's team gives us in that respect.
Right, thank you. David.
Good to see you all. Good, nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So hopefully the new faces enjoy these types of presentations. I always do, and I generally enjoy most of the questions as well that follow it. So I'll just run through it. I'll try and get through reasonably quickly because I'm guessing there'll be some questions towards the end, particularly given some recent events. And I acknowledge the earlier comment about interesting times, the curse surrounding that. Okay, so the report is, the information is as of 31 December, which now seems like a long time ago, but we'll comment basically on the key reporting requirements as of that date, and we'll look at economic data, economic overview, and as stated in the report, what's on our mind for the quarter and what's on our mind for the rest of the year. And of course, questions at the end. Okay. I welcome any questions, particularly from the new members who may not be familiar with this report, but I'll kind of just run through it. So basically, council debt, which is that debt in the top number in the top right-hand corner, that is the debt that is basically drawn against external providers, which in the case of this council is the LGFA, which is common against most councils. If the new members want any background in terms of how the LGFA operates and the benefits to councils, happy to provide that at another time. Just moving down the numbers on the right-hand side, liquidity 64.7 million. The liquidity ratio, 161.8%. The LGFA requirement is that it has to be greater than 110%, so the council is comfortably above that. And I think the good news story there is the weighted average cost of funds for council of 407%, which is good in absolute terms and good in relative terms to other councils. Now, again, that's dated as of 31 December. That number will have come down. And I think another consideration needs to be given to that number as well. That's I almost need to reword that because it's basically cost of your debt. Now, it kind of ignores the other interest income you've got coming through on the other side, which in the case of this council can be quite significant as well. So think of that as a high number, well, not a high number, but think of it as it's a good number, but when you actually include the interest revenue, it's actually even lower than that. Policy and compliance, obviously you tick all the boxes, and as of 31 December, you had one term deposit in that box right in the bottom leftish side. And just want to point out too, on the 23rd of January, as part of Environment Canterbury's working capital strategy to sort of maximise its returns, we managed to put a 5 million term deposit in place with ANZ at a rate of 485. So it's kind of nice to always arbitrage the banks, i.e. Our weighted average cost of funds is 407 and yet you're earning 485 for a portion of your funds. Oh, come back to that. Come back to it if you want to later. Again, look, I think the key point here is that our strategy with your council, I think, is played out really well in the sense that from a policy perspective, we've been working with your fixed rate requirements have been at the bottom end of your policy bands. So that means from a positive perspective, we've been as fully exposed to the fall in interest rates as we possibly could have been, and that's played out well. But I'll come back to that. I'll circle back to that point in terms of what's on our mind for the balance of the year. You'll see the graph on the bottom left-hand side there, projected cost of funds. Now, you may be wondering why is that sort of number sort of moving higher, whereas the talk about what the Reserve Bank is doing, you would think that would be certainly lower, but what the market is saying or implying it from its rates is that the low in interest rates should be seen this year and thereafter rates moving slightly higher, which is reflected in that graph. Also, Environment Canterbury has a scenario where it had a couple of really low fixed rate bonds and I think a a low swap rate that's going to be maturing in the next couple of years as well, which impacts its overall cost of funds going forward. Okay, I'll just quickly run through this. Any questions, we can cover that at the end. Look, inflation, the key number there is 2.2% for the year. The Reserve Bank's aiming at 2. It's not quite at 2, but it's close enough. GDP, September quarter, look, it was a shocker, and that's part of the reason why we've seen the cut in rates yesterday. Unemployment rate, 5.1%. That's still expected to move higher. I think I've rattled out this line before in my university days. Full employment was defined as 5%, so that gives you an idea that unemployment in New Zealand is still quite low in a relative sense. I know that may sound a bit harsh, but from an economics perspective, from a longer term perspective, that's kind of what the number normally looks like. And as we know, retail guys are doing it tough. House prices, particularly in the Wellington and Auckland areas, have been doing it tough. And government debt has ballooned massively since the start of 2020. Look, I briefly touched on this point with one of the councillors earlier, also independents earlier. This is interesting. Again, it just reminds us of, should we be worried about what's happening in the US? And the short answer to that question is yes. The correlation between our long-term bonds, our long-term rates and US long-term rates is actually very good. And we've actually got a really unusual situation at the moment. I'm not sure if it's recognised in this graph or not, but our long-term rates are actually slightly lower than US long-term rates. And that's a very unusual situation. So that either implies that the US rates are too high or ours are too low. And that's something that worries us from professional advisors in the interest rate space, particularly when we're looking about longer-term rates. Look, I won't talk to this, you can just read it yourself, but some encouraging signs in terms of business and consumer confidence. This may be of interest. Again, that blue line there, the market implied rates, is kind of what the market is forecasting for longer term rates. And you'll see quite a divergence there between the banks in terms of expectations around what the OCR is going and 90-day rates are going to look like going out to, in this case here, December 30. I think the interesting one there, Westpac, who I actually have a lot of faith in their particular brand of economics at the moment, are suggesting that the OCR will start increasing at the end of this year. The grey one is BNZ. They're somewhere between 275 and 3. Okay, what's on our mind for the coming quarter? Sorry, I should have mentioned earlier, one of the things that we were looking at for your council was there is some commercial paper that is rolling on the 15th of March. So we've been in discussions about what to do with that. Oh, there we go, sorry. 8.7 million, 17th of March. We recommend that we roll for another 3 months. That fits with a situation of lower interest rates. And the commercial paper has the lowest margin as well. And your percentages of commercial paper versus other products sort of it fits nicely too. We have recommended that 2 swaps be placed at around that 355 level. That's to remain within policy. The reason that we need to do that is A, because of view, and because our Treasury policy is based on time-based policy bands, we've got a situation where time erosion takes place. So, for example, if we put in a 5-year fixed rate, after a year, that fixed rate has only 4 years left to go. So we always need to make sure that we're topping up our cover. And in terms of last point there, as per that term deposit, we're looking to continue to optimise your cash management. And that last point there that basically says at this point in time, you've got a lot of your debt that's exposed to, that allows you to participate in the lower interest rates that we expect to flow through in the next 6 to 9 months. Okay, coming to the ends of this. So what's on our mind for the coming year for yourselves and for the bulk of our other clients as well? Look, we have operated on a general policy of our clients sitting at Treasury policy minimums based on a view that interest rates will fall. That looks like it's playing out. We're mindful that, look, like everything in the world, interest rates move in cycles. We think this cycle will sort of play out or reach its low this year. So what we want to do in terms of your particular policy is to move from policy minimums to policy midpoints. I was amused by my line there on Trump has appeared to make market volatility great again, but it is a reality, and we just need to recognise that. Interesting, for the first time yesterday in the Reserve Bank statement, they made specific comment about the impact of tariffs on New Zealand, and particularly a tariff war. So again, something we need to keep in mind of. And of course, it's part of our job. You know, as we see evidence change and evolving, that will change our recommendations for your council too. That's it.
Thank you, David. Very informative. Happy to take questions. I've got them hands going up everywhere, so we'll start this side. Councillor Sunkle.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Do you have a feeling for when one should, this organisation, look to fix as opposed to sitting in the floating, given those kind of the longer term, or our long term rates versus US or wherever?
Well, look, so we've got a strategy in place. We're trying to encourage the council to enter into some swaps at 355-ish. We saw the value part of the curve is still being around about 3.5. So over the course of the next, or from now, over the next 9 months, as we would like to get council moved to policy midpoints. And how are we going to do that? We're going to probably predominantly do that via orders, which basically means you place an order in the market. When you see market volatility, that pushes interest rates down, and we can basically transact with that volatility. So the plan is to use the volatility to our advantage. And again, the stuff that we're looking at is what won't predominantly be driven by the Reserve Bank. It'll be driven by, as I say, outside forces. And I think there will be some volatility this year.
Happy with that response? Thank you. I've got Graham, then Councillor Southworth, then I think Councillor Swiggs, in that order. Graham.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just noting for the record the compliance, which is in our of policy and covenants, which is noted in the minute. My key point was, what is the point that we should be starting to move towards midpoints in our policy range, which you've already covered off. So we've done very well being at the bottom end of the range in a scenario of lowering interest rates, but as we start to see the US potentially coming up in the back end of the year, that's going to infect through to us, and the US Fed Reserve are saying that the rates are likely to stay up for longer than they were perhaps saying 3 months ago. And so we're moving into an environment where potentially we're hitting the lower point. And I was going to ask that, and just noting that 15 September we've got the sweetheart deal at 0.56% coming off, and we've got another one coming off on September 26, still a year and a half away, at 1.87, but it's a sizable chunk of our debt, about 10% of our total debt. So we could be looking at some needing to balance the locking in some reductions with the increases that will no doubt come when those two sweetheart deals come off.
Yeah, and that's noted. I know, David, you've noted that too, that we are getting the benefit of those current arrangements. But yes, you're right, Graham, at some point that's going to start to go the other way. Yeah.
I think the nice thing about, even though they're great deals, and as a percentage term, I don't expect the impact to be just too significant, but it is acknowledged.
Okay.
That's why I was noting the two offsetting factors.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on your comment about unemployment rate, and I'm not sure it's specifically relevant to this, but just really interested that I thought governments had got better or had changed the way they define unemployment and are getting better at pushing people into categories that don't count as unemployment. The person themselves might feel unemployed, but the government doesn't recognise them in their stats as that. And so in real terms, is that something that's that has changed. And so, how does that, I'm not sure it's so relevant to us at Environment Canterbury, but in terms of your comment as an economist, are economists still recognising unemployment in the real personal sense of the word rather than as a statistical sense of the word? And because it influences, you've just sort of diminished and in a way the importance of an impact of unemployment by going, oh, well, that's a normal state of affairs. But I think that the reality might have changed somewhat in the way it's presented in the data.
Blimey, that's a tough question. I think the issue, I recognise the points you're making. My understanding is those numbers have been, in terms of the measures of unemployment, have been relatively consistent. But, and I'll quote a previous economist that I worked for, and it's a really interesting societal question in the terms of that, what is a healthy level of employment or unemployment in a society? And I'll quote Cameron Baggery, who probably won't thank me for doing this, but when unemployment got to 3%, he thought that was unhealthy, and he used the line that's at a level where even idiots have jobs, which if you're an employer, again, it's a societal question, isn't it? If you're an employer and if you're looking for productivity, again, look, it's a balance, isn't it, in terms of what's a... Yeah, look, I don't have the exact answer to that question, but I'm just pointing out that there is both pros and cons. And in terms of, look, I didn't mean to be dismissive in terms of the economics definition of full employment, but I think one of the nicer things about this particular recession is such, most of the bank economists see unemployment peaking at around about 5.5%. So hopefully that's a worst case sort of scenario.
Thank you. Councillor Swiggs.
Thanks for the report. And whoever wrote this report, I've been dreading the day that Donald Trump ended up officially in our reports, and he is on point number 6, Donald bloody Trump. So it's all downhill from here, I hope. I don't hope, actually, that's the wrong word. But my question that I've got for this is, does currency play much into what we're into this? Because we've got some really strange stuff happening in the international currency markets. Does this play into our debt, into our all of this space? Because I mean, it touches on a lot of at the consumer level, but does it impact much on this at the moment? I mean, obviously with our potential, that slide you showed before where our interest rates and stuff are quite close together, and there's some sort of divergence. That divergence is causing us some challenges with our dollar at the moment.
Yeah, inflation is important, and Dave, you might remember the old days, the old MCI index, but the two things the Reserve Bank would look at was 90-day rates and the trade-weighted index, which was the basket of currencies that we traded against. So they were the two major barometers that the Reserve Bank would look at. So what the Reserve Bank currencies covers a few things, but let's just focus on the immediate impact in terms of the Reserve Bank and interest rate settings, and in the sense that all things being equal, is that if the currency falls, anything that we buy from overseas costs a bit more, and that feeds through to inflation. So that has an inflationary impact. Again, though, for any given event, there's both winners and losers. So, for example, at the moment, the dairy sector is facing the perfect storm. You've got low currency, high production, good prices, good production. So again, you've got low currency is good for attracting overseas investment into New Zealand. It's good for attracting tourists, but it does have an inflationary impact. It's just a case of us navigating through the shorter term and longer term impacts of that. But yeah, you're right. It's something that, as I said, going back from a Reserve Bank point of view, it's very important. Yeah.
So, sorry, just to follow on from that. So you're saying it doesn't really have much of an impact on our Treasury in terms of our debts and costs?
Not in terms of your debt and your cost of capital, but it potentially has an impact on your interest rates. For example, if the currency fell significantly, that led to higher inflation, the Reserve Bank would have to increase interest rates, which would then impact your council.
And just one, on your page 84 here, the 10-year government bond rates, I think you've just got a mistake in terms of the New Zealand difference and change. It went up 0.17, not down 0.17.
If that's the case, my apologies.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Good detailed review. Councillor Edge.
Thanks very much for the report. And you're right, there's so much been happening since the 31st of December in terms of where we are with inflation, which, as you say, it's going to be around about 2%, and the official cash rate, depending on who you're listening to, it's going down substantially quickly and could be 2.75, depending on which bank you listen to. I think it was the BNZ suggesting 2.75 by the end of the year. Yeah. I was listening to the Auditor General's seminar on Friday, and the Treasury person was there talking. Unfortunately, they didn't have the information online, so we lost some really good discussion about the state of the New Zealand economy and going forward, and some interesting things. In terms of your report, that liquidity and funding chart, where I've never seen the commercial paper. There's a little box, that one there, the brown box. That hasn't. I don't think it's appeared before. Could you just explain? You're talking about 8.7 million commercial papers. What's the significance of that?
Thank you. LGFA offers 3 funding products to entities that have acceded to the LGFA. One is long-term fixed-rate bonds, which currently allow you to go out to, I think, 2037. The other one is floating-rate notes, which again allow you to go out to 2037, but the interest rates are reset every 90 days. And commercial paper, which is used for short-term purposes, and that's typically out to a year. But in terms of the most common term for commercial paper, which goes back to the sort of the interbank 90-day bank bond market, so it's really used for it's a shorter term funding mechanism, but it's definitely got its part to play in terms of the overall funding mix.
Just the 4.07 at the moment, and you're saying that in reality, the cost of our funds, when you take into account, so you were suggesting it would be less than that, because of the liquidity at 64? There's some interest being earned on that, and so that's what's the interest being earned on that 64 in terms of if it.
My understanding is that any surplus funds that Environment Canterbury has, its banker pays its OCR, which up to yesterday was 4.25, which is actually a very good return. So yeah. So for example, yeah. Anyway, so if it has high levels of working capital, it's actually getting a pretty good return on those funds. But it's a good question to ask, though, because we obviously need to make sure that we're optimising the rates. Because, again, just going back to that, every bank has its own individual policy. Some councils or some banks would only pay, for example, OCR less 1%. Even, for example, that term deposit that's in that box in that bottom of that page there, and it shows the advantage of casting the net reasonably wide. That the difference in rates between the three banks that we went to was about 50 basis points. So it definitely pays to look around.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other questions on the report? Thank you. I'll put the motion otherwise, and we can have some further discussion at that point. So the motion is that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the quarterly report from Bancorp Treasury Services to 31 December 2024, which confirms that Environment Canterbury remains compliant with its Treasury policy and borrowing covenants. Do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Swiggs. Seconder, Councillor Sunkel. Any further discussion? No? Any further questions? All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, David and Dave. Just conscious of time, intention would be to pass a motion for us to extend past the 2 hours so we can complete what's in open, and then we might have a break before we get into PX. Does that work for people? Is someone happy? I'm happy to move that motion. Someone happy to second? Thank you, Councillor Karakia. All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, let's get into the remaining parts of the open agenda. So, assurance, risk and security update. Dave's still here. So, Dave, happy for you to talk to your report, please.
I'll take this report as read, but just note the two attachments with the two independent assurance reports, and as the Chair referred to earlier in the meeting, one will be is also in the PX session later on. In terms of the PwC report on fraud risk assessment and accepting the comments earlier on that were made here, management accepts the key contextual factors that have been raised by PwC, and that review has found no areas of significant control gaps in fraud risk areas, and it's raised 5 areas for potential focus by management, and management have responded to those focus areas. I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I agree. We have responses from management to those reports. Do we have any questions on, let's take the PwC report first. Is that a Councillor Edge? No? No? Okay. The Deloitte report then, bearing in mind that also does come up later on for further questions in the Public Excluded section. Okay, no further questions. If that's the case, then I'll put the motion that the audit... Sorry, Councillor Edge.
Not on the PwC report, but the audit cultural review of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I was just wondering if you could just update us whether progress is on that, and is staff perhaps going to come and do a bit of a briefing on that?
Dave or Giles? Oh, sorry. Nook, would you like to respond?
Related.
Do you mind if just put a bit of context around this, because I note that the reset wānanga, which is the wānanga that the Ngāi Tahu councillors have been involved in over the past 12 months, and this is actually part of why the timing has, to me, it's actually probably gone on too long. And we're only waiting on one other runanga, actually, and we've got a really good, we've got 9 that we've done, and we're waiting on just this one, which, if we want to wait, well, that's why the timing has taken so long. And it's not easy to get these people together, to actually wānanga over, reset wānanga, as we're calling them. So that's probably the reason. There may be others that may have come up, but I just want to highlight that because it's one of the major reasons why this is taking longer than we thought it would. Thanks, Grant, but I appreciate the question.
Thank you. That's noted. Thank you. Carolyn?
Just a general comment and a bit of cross-fertilisation between the papers. It was quite a useful combination of papers for today's agenda. That it's encouraging to see that there's work underway to address the systemic things that have been identified in relation to fraud and procurement and policies. But I was also really encouraged to see that you're starting from a base that was captured in the Audit New Zealand report that said that there's a really high score around probity and financial prudence within the culture from the top that was reflected in that Audit New Zealand report. And I think that's a really healthy environment in which to be undertaking the work that's being done here, and it's comprehensive and important. But I was really encouraged to see what came through the Audit New Zealand report is that cultural norm and the leadership was clearly aligned with what you need, and you're really just doing the mechanics to catch up with the culture that you've already got.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually I'd endorse that. I have to say I was very pleased to see this particular report and the paper that was in there. The PwC work that was done, I think, was very good in the report, and the outcome of that report is actually very good. Councillor Swiggs?
Yeah, I'd echo the same thing. It was a good report to read, and I think there's some really good stuff to focus on in here. I don't have any other comments on it except for on page 118, where all of the participants are blanked out for obvious reasons, but in this open agenda, but we don't have the reason. It's just in a more of a process thing. Should have the reason under the Legoima Act why it's been blanked out.
Okay, so they were just the reason for the redaction, is what you're saying? Yeah.
It generally, officially, actually needs to be provided.
Actually, Giles has pointed out that it is actually there on page, which page, Giles?
Page 91, bottom. It says notes why the reductions have been made.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on that paper or reports from anyone before I put the motion? One, Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. So yeah, page 93, figure 1, there's a sort of web diagram showing where we want to get to in terms of maturity across all of the different aspects that we've picked out. And we've got a map of where we were at and where we're now at. And it looks like we're making more progress in terms of some of the sort of leadership and security aspects. But then when you look particularly around planning policies and processes and then cultural behaviour and education and comms, the progress isn't looking as good as what we've got in some of the other aspects. So is there are we intentionally putting more focus into the ones we're making more progress on with an expectation that the others will sort of get pulled along with that? Or is there some other are we prioritising one over the other, and what's the plan, or why is that looking that way?
Charles?
Thanks for the question. I think that this is obviously an assessment that's done, has been done by staff. The original assessment was based on an internal audit review that I think PwC did from memory. So there is a degree of subjectivity. I think it sort of reflects the fact that actually some of the easier actions to take are in the actual specific domains of physical security, information, actually doing some of the basics that we maybe hadn't had in place. There's obviously a relationship between all of these domains, but the shift in terms of culture and overall approach across the organisation, takes a bit longer, is often slightly harder to measure, and will flow through in time, is what I would anticipate.
Thank you. You happy to move? You're waiting for me to move. Okay. So I'll move that the resolution that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the update on assurance, risk and security and endorses the management responses to the independent reviews relating to the fraud risk assessment and the development projects key learnings review. I have Councillor Sunkel has moved. Would someone like to second, please? Thank you, Graham. Any further discussion? No. Those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, Dave. Let's move to 9.6, the payroll remediation project. And welcome Joe back to speak to this. Or are you going to speak to Giles? Joe.
Ahi Marie, anō koutou. Take as read, there's one update I'd like to make because I think it's largely, I hope you agree, there's good news in this paper. We've started to make some fabulous payments to current and former employees. I just wanted to point out at point 4, at point 3, we talked there around commencing payments to externals around the 29th of January. I just want to confirm that has indeed happened. We've paid 170 of our former employees last week, which is great news. Take any questions or part-time. Okay.
Thank you. And I'd like to comment that too, actually, with a number of organisations that have obviously had concerns and problems in this payroll holiday pay area. So it's pleasing to see that this organisation has taken that matter seriously and done the work that's been required to calculate what it should be doing to pay its employees. So I would endorse that piece of work. Councillor Sunkel.
Just as a note of interest, do we have a sort of a median value we're paying? As I know it's and whatever. Do we just have an idea of?
Yes, I just ran the numbers while I was sitting there actually in my scrawly notes. So we've made, on average, we've made from 1 cent, and we've made quite a number of 1 cent payments, and then the most significant payment you see there. So if I divided that by the number of people, and that becomes an average of 1,390. But I mean, an average is a rough figure. I mean, think about the bell curve, but yeah, 1,300, 14, yeah.
So I actually have a follow-up question that reminded me of that. The one large one, was that a specific type of employee? How did they get to be that, significantly larger than either the average or everyone else?
Yeah, without going into too many specifics around the individual employee, but generally speaking, the larger payments come from casual employees, those who have had a length of tenure covering the whole period of time, those who have had variable hours, those who have received additional payments such as higher duties, those who have taken periods of parental leave and returned. So all of those things combined can make for a more significant payment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions then on that report before I put the motion? No, thank you. Okay, so I'll put the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the update on the payroll remediation project, including the recalculation payment, the progress on the status of payments, the payroll system remediation work underway to correct non-compliance, and that following payroll system changes, calculations for the period post-September 22 for current and former employees will be required and further payments will be made where necessary. Do I have someone who will move that, please? Thank you, Graham. Seconded by Councillor Sunkel. Any further discussion? Yes.
I'd just like to note, I guess, the thanks that we're sort of coming to the end of the process once it was identified. Apologies. And as you said, we sit with a whole bunch of different entities that could have, should have known better, but I think it's the legislation that has caught any number of manner of entities out. So, yeah, just pleased to note that we are coming towards the end of it and the work that has been required internally and externally to get us to this point.
Great, thank you. We have the motion. It's been forwarded and seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, 9.7. Dave, would you like to come back? This is the annual tax update, in this case, fringe benefit tax by Ernst & Young. Again, the report is taken as read. So, Dave, happy for you just to flag anything that you might want to specifically call out. Otherwise, we'll get into questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess this is part of a wider tax framework that we do try and review one indirect tax of the 3 each year. This was FBT. It's good to get the independent feedback that we have good systems and process to collect and ensure the FBT treatment works well. There's a couple of minor improvements, but they're not significant in terms of dollar numbers. Thank you. Take any questions?
Yes, thank you. I think it's good to get that assurance. I think it's a good process to have those indirect taxes reviewed. I think it's a good process. And I have to say, yes, the report did not find anything of any substance, which was useful in my view. Any questions then, Graham?
Great process to go through. Looking at other councils I'm involved in and talking to even further numbers, there's a number of councils changing FIMS systems at the moment with legacy product moving into the cloud. Aware of the need of a couple of voluntary disclosures because of issues with flagging up of minor rates types. So just encourage checking through in that area pretty carefully during the migration processes and things. There's flags that haven't quite transferred as well as they they might have been, in one case, setting of a new rate in a council that 2 years on, they realised that they hadn't flagged the GST correctly, so they had a six-figure voluntary disclosure to make. So care around that as we go through systems changes. And GST is one of the biggest risks in councils given the nature of them.
Yes, thank you, Graham. When is GST the next one? Do you know when in the cycle with EY GST is next due? Would it be useful to do it just after the FIMS? And is the one that's likely to have the largest implication?
I can't recall which order they're in, but a point's taken and well made. Okay. I'll have a look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Sunkel.
I'm going to steal some of your thoughts here. So in these papers, so are you providing us with assurance that we are right, or are you saying this is a good report and we're happy? And I guess there's a subtle nuance or difference between providing assurance versus going, yeah, it's sweet.
Dave?
Oh, for us and for yourselves, I think this report provides independent assurance.
It's just a follow-up then is I guess when some of these reports do come through, if it is very clear that this is what this report is saying and we are providing that assurance or the closing of the gap or of the circle.
Yeah, point taken. I agree. The usefulness of the reporting is to give this committee the assurance that it's seeking. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Yeah, so related to that, really, on page 135 of the report, the findings of the report sort of describes low risk and high risk. So you're assuring us that the matters identified in there are kind of going to be addressed and looked at going forward.
Yeah, and we've had some debate around the colour coding and things here with EY, because whilst they might show high risk, the actual material or dollar consequence is likely to be very small.
Yeah, particularly in the context of FBT, I would have thought, but yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any further questions then on the EY report? If not, I'll put the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the report on the review of fringe benefit tax by Ernst & Young and notes that an annual tax update will be included in the committee's work plan. Do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Edge. Seconded, Councillor Swiggs. All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, 9.8, report from the Chair. So just a few things in there for noting, really. Again, happy to take that as read. Really just highlighting that, in particular, the Office of the Auditor General and their integrity framework is well worth having a read if you haven't already. I think it does provide a really good foundation for understanding that, and conceptually it's actually written in very plain English. It's quite an easy document to follow given the context of what it's actually trying to achieve. So if you haven't had a chance to read that, I would recommend that we do so. Is there any other questions on any of the matters that are in the Chair's report? Councillor Swiggs.
Number 12, page 143, 2025, looking ahead, point 12 there, I think I said. Staff are investigating areas where organisational savings can be made. What areas are we looking at the moment? And in those areas that you are potentially looking at, are there any implications for our annual plan coming up or deliverability of things that we've promised in the long-term plan?
So I think it's a combination of things. Clearly, at the next Regional Delivery Committee, we will be presenting the 6+6 forecast, which obviously is looking at where savings have been achieved this year. And obviously, that links to the performance report that was provided to the Regional Delivery Committee a couple of weeks ago in terms of performance as against budget. So that will identify some organisational savings. In particular, also where we have centralised budgets, so the digital budget, we continue to identify opportunities to consolidate licensing and to achieve additional savings. And the work that we do through our change and improvement, we've already, I think, highlighted some of the success we've had in consenting, and we're continuing to apply that to some of our other areas, such as the compliance improvement programme and other work in the regulatory space in particular.
Thank you, Councillor Karakia. Oh, sorry, was there a supplementary?
Just follow on from that, through Chair. that's really, really good to know. And one of the things I'm quite keen to understand is where the organisation, and it's not really something I don't think can be answered right now, but in terms of our rates looking forward and how we treat borrowing and natural capital, and also looking at repayments, if we get a rates cap in the next little while from the central government, there's a big risk here that we won't be able to afford what we want to do, and what we may need to pay back in the way that we treat natural capital, in term, which is not against capital assets, I suppose. And it's not just that; there's a whole lot of other things. But I'm really worried about having unbalanced budgets if we are only able to do a certain amount of rates increases moving forward. So I'd be quite keen in that looking forward, especially in that conversation, for us to be thinking about that as a very real risk that this organisation needs to be aware of. And I think we should probably start to put that on our radar.
Okay, thank you. Noted.
I agree. One of the things that we, as officers, needs to extend our thinking on is some of that scenario planning in terms of the announcements recently from government and the potential impact of things like rate capping. Experienced that in another country a long way away. And what does that mean for us, and how would we respond would be a useful area to explore with council sooner rather than later, I think.
Yeah, I agree. The timing of that conversation is pretty urgent, I would have thought.
That's why I want to raise it and see if we can put it, because it is a risk to this organisation, especially in the Treasury space and the way we treat our borrowings currently.
Great, thank you. Very good. Councillor Karakia.
Mihi atu ka koe anō. Can I just, on page 143, point number 14, looking ahead, and we talk about the local government elections, and our previous take that we were just talking about was keeping things on the radar. One thing here is that I still believe that we need to keep the Ngāi Tahu Representation Bill repeal actually still on the radar, because it hasn't gone away and it's just been put there. And I've always explained it like it's like a guillotine over our heads. So it would be good, whether it's a risk to the organisation or not, I believe it is, but I think it still needs to be put in this 2025 looking ahead, particularly under the local government elections, because it may get to a point where actually it is repealed before that. We don't know.
Okay, agree. We can find a place to make sure that stays on the radar. Yeah, thank you. Got it. Sorry, actually, I had Councillor Edge first, and I'll come back to you.
Yes, I know it's a bit of a discussion going on here. Yeah, I take a different view to point 12. It worried me that if we retrench too much, then we potentially don't deliver what our community wants. Natural capital is a way of delivering some stuff for intergenerational benefit, and that is what we are here for. That is our remit as regional councillors, and we take an oath along those kind of lines. So for me, we have to be very careful going forward that we just don't see the idea of cutting and slashing just for the sake of it, without thinking about the longer term consequences of doing that. And I think that there is a balance, but it's just a precautionary approach in the long term, and not throwing away the idea of borrowing, because it can lead to some good things.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm sure that the Finance and Strategy Committee would also be thinking about that perspective as they do their work coming forward. What I certainly hope they do. Councillor Sunkel.
Thanks. I guess one of the other risks we face is what is the future of local government, and whether we should be putting too much time and thought in. Are we going towards amalgamation within the TAs, and then what does this role become? unitary authorities, what does the future like? So is there a point where we need to start thinking about the decisions we make in relation to what a future might be? We don't know what that future is, so it's ethereal in a sense, but I think there's a point where we do need to start thinking about what a future might be given the conversations in the wider community.
Thank you. I mean, clearly we need a watching brief across all of those perspectives, really. I'm not sure if we can invest in a crystal ball that tells us what the answer is going to be, but we do need to be keeping well abreast of all those sort of issues, no question about it, and understanding from a risk point of view as the political landscape that central government moves, what does that mean for us potentially? Yeah, noted. Okay, any other discussions otherwise? Oh, sorry, we have two over here. I'm not sure who was first.
Sorry, just to follow up on John's comment, there is a bit of a discussion going on at the Mayoral Forum on that, really mature discussion. So there's a bit of work that's been done in the next few months, just looking at those issues so that we're all better informed. So that'll be a little bit shared in the Chair's report next week as well. So thank you.
That's very useful. Thank you. Councillor Southwood.
And yeah, just sort of following up from Councillor Edge's point around sort of natural capital and thinking about future generations, the Treasury has just put together some new guidance and some rates around net present value, finding ways to actually recognise that value of the dollar that we spend now on the long-term future, including right out to sort of like 100 years away. And so I think that's potentially can really start to change things, because we've got a particular way of doing things numerically that doesn't necessarily, hasn't felt intrinsically right often. And so I just think that's something that would be worth, and I've shared around councillors, and I have just realised I'll send to some others as well. There was a good seminar on it I watched earlier in the week, but I think that's actually really important that we've trying to our best to recognise that really important context that we can help deliver on. But it's just making sure we've got the right checks and balances.
Thank you. Yeah, but I'd be very interested to see that. I haven't seen it, so I'd be very interested to see that if we could. Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Yes, Councillor Southwood shared the document and the thing with me, and it is about doing cost-benefit analysis in terms of social and environmental benefit. And some accounting research has got some accounting mechanism that can allow for the consideration of that. So, worthwhile seeing it. Looks good.
Okay, thank you. It'll be worth looking at that. I'm sure our auditors at the back of the room will be interested in any decisions we might want to make around that too. Anything further before I put the motion that I'm happy to move, actually from the Chair, that the Chair's report, an update is received? Councillor Karakia, happy to second. Those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you, carried. Okay, let's take a break, please. 10 minutes. Oh, sorry.
Te mana me kai there, Michael. I just want to go back, just that paper, which was, I think, 9.2. There was just something I said there. I want to actually correct. Is that okay? And it was definitely on paper. It was around the wānanga that we're holding. There wasn't just one moiraki, there's also taumotu as well. And I also want to retract actually part of that, because it might have intimated that I was actually takahearing on the mana of those two papatupu runanga by saying, we should just get on with doing what we do. So I retract that, and to acknowledge the mana of moiraki and also taumotu, because moiraki is where the kaiwhakahaere of Ngaitahu, Justin Tipper, that is his runanga, and of course they're actually deep into the Ngaitahu water claim in the High Court. It's a reason for that delay. And the other one is taumotu were waiting actually on a restructure within their runanga before they actually met with us. So in saying that, so that's where I'm at now. So kia ora.
Okay, kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. We can make sure that is reflected in the minutes, please. Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Can I just follow up on that too? And yes, look, you're quite right. I mean, the whole process of this audit was being led by our Runanga councillors and with our team internally, but really good discussions with the Runanga, and whatever time it takes and the need, because it will be important that once that comes through. So I'm in terms of trying to speed up, I don't think let's not worry about that. Nook.
That's all right, but before this triennium finishes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the intention is now to have a break. Do I have to move that? I've done that motion. That one's already been done. Yep. Sorry, Graham.
Could I suggest that we take item 10 of moving into PX so that the streaming and everything can be conveniently cut off?
Very good idea, Graham.
The breaks taken.
Very good suggestion. Would you like to move accordingly?
I'm happy to move in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Second, Councillor Pauling. Those in favour? All right. Thank you. We will move into PX and have a break for, I think we're scheduled to have it for 10 minutes. So we'll be back in the chamber, please, at 3:34. Sorry. Okay, we are now back into the open part of the meeting. Thank you. Just note the next meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee will be held on the 15th of May. And I would like to invite Councillor Karakia, please, to close with a karakia.
E mihi atu kia koe e te tiamana. Actually, it's really opportune that I get to finish with a karakia whakamutuka, or the final karakia, because then it gives me the opportunity just to tidy up a little bit of tikanga in the fact that I acknowledged our new independent member of this committee, and also I need to acknowledge by name Graham McGlynn. But I want to acknowledge also Graham Naylor, actually, who Carolyn is actually replacing, and just to acknowledge him and his time, actually, that he was on this committee. So just to acknowledge that too. Mihi atu kia koe Graham. The final one is kia ora to you. This was a hui roa, which means a long hui, but it was a good one. And it also showed the value that our independent directors actually bring to this committee, and also the independent chair. And I'm sure my colleagues here would agree with that, hopefully. So on that note, I'm going to ko tēnei karakia whakamutuka, our closing karakia. Kia tau kia tātou ki tō tātou whai o tō tātou ariki hu karaiti, me taroha tātua, me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake tonu atu. Āmene. And go the Crusaders.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience as we went through what was indeed a very long meeting. Thank you.